Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Internetwork Experts Technology Seminars. I am Brian McGann, and along with Brian Dennis, today we're going to be talking about CCIE Lab Strategy, a Structured Approach. Now, before we get started here, I'd like to take a second to give you some background information on myself, and Brian Dennis is going to give you some information about himself. Personally, I have been doing networking since about 1997, 1998. Currently, I have 3 CCIEs and a routing and switching service provider and security. Originally, before that, I went through the CCNA tracks, the CCNP tracks, ultimately before getting routing and switching as my first CCIE discipline there. Now, today what we're going to be talking about is mainly CCIE Lab Strategy that is going to apply to the routing and switching lab exam. But the method that we're going to be talking about is the same method that I use and that Brian Dennis uses in order to prepare for not only our original routing and switching exams, but the subsequent CCIEs that we have accumulated since then. So mainly we're going to be focusing on routing and switching, but the same type of approach can be applied to other tracks like service provider, voice, etc.
Okay, so a little bit about myself here. I've been teaching CCIE classes off and on for about 6 years. I do a lot of consulting still. I originally got my CCIE back in 1996, and that was a little over 10 years ago. So Cisco does have the new 10-year logo available for people who took the lab 10 years ago, which is a little neat, I guess. I also did the ISP dial, the security, the service fighter, and I'm doing the voice right now. So I'm preparing for the voice CCIE today, actually, when I'm not doing, when this is over. I hope to have it completed within the next 30 to 60 days here. So we'll see here. We will be releasing voice classes and voice products starting about the same time, about another 60 days from now. So about end of October 2007. We will be looking for beta testers for voice if anybody is interested. A little bit of background about myself. To be 100% honest with you, about 11 years ago now, I saw a job ad, and on that job ad it said CCIE, $100 an hour. And I'm like, wow, what's a CCIE? And how are they making $100 an hour? I was doing Novell networking, and in fact, the MCSE was just released by Microsoft at that time. And I was actually looking at attending some of the classes for the MCSE back then, because I'd already done the Novell certifications, and I saw this CCIE, and I'm like, wow, what's this? So I did some research, and long story short, about 6-8 months later, I actually was a CCIE. And since then, I've never looked back. I mean, I've done nothing but Cisco networking since then. I do some BSD and Linux type work, but other than that, I mean, it's pure Cisco. I don't really work with any other vendors. The way I select networking equipment is if it has a little Cisco bridge on the front, it's what you want to put in your network. If it doesn't have the Cisco bridge on the front, you really don't want to put in your network. Okay, I joke a little bit. Cisco's not always the best solution, but it's it definitely is a good solution to stick with. All right, a little bit about my preparation strategies. When I did the original CCIE, the first CCIE I ever met or talked to or even knew of was the proctor. When I walked into the CCIE lab in 1996, the proctor was the first CCIE I ever met or ever spoke with. Okay, I never even knew anybody who was a CCIE. I mean, back then, the first CCIE is 1024. That is the actual CCIE lab itself. So the first real CCIE is 10025. So, there was only 1,000 people back then who had the CCIE. So when I was preparing, I really didn't know what to prepare for. So I just spent as much time as possible on the equipment. I probably spent about $6,000 to $8,000 on my home lab, and you know what I got for $6,000 to $8,000 back then? 3 2500s. That's all I got back then. 3 2500s. I mean, routers were hard to come by. in the used market there. I used to take down our company's network on the weekend to so that I could use the routers and the devices there for practicing for the CCIE. So I did that, like I said, in 1996. I went back and did the ISP dial. I did the ISP dial in 2000, which was really good. I was doing a lot of dials, working for a service provider at that time, and I've worked for a lot of ISPs over the years. 2003, when the security came out, I did the security. I did the SP exam after it changed in 2006. November it changed, and I went to the lab in December. And now I'm also working on the voice CCIE. Okay, let's do a quick introduction about the classroom here. You can adjust the bandwidth of the classroom for your connection here. If you're on a low-speed connection, so like a dial-up or an ISDN connection, you can adjust it up at the top. Questions, if you have a question during the V-seminar here, or during, if you ever attend a live class, you can type the question in there and hit submit. And actually, now while I'm doing the presentation, Brian is actually answering the questions that come through. And that's the way it works in the real class. If you take one of our live classes, the questions that you ask are private, with the exception of questions that should be relevant to the whole class. So if you have a question that's relevant to the whole class, Brian can, or whoever's the moderator, can answer it and then submit it back to the whole class, which makes it really nice. So you're not in a class, you're not getting, if you got a student who's asking 50,000 questions all day long, unfortunately the only person that would be aggravated by it would be me or Brian. The other students do not see it there. Okay, and also too, this V-seminar is recorded, and probably most people watching it are going to watch it in the recorded format here. Okay, a little quick objective about what the idea of this here. So what's the idea of the V-seminar here? We want to talk about what resources are available out there on the market, either free resources or paid for resources that are available to you to prepare for the CCIE Lab. We'll talk about overall general lab strategy, and we'll talk about creating a plan, creating a study plan, and how to work around situations like your home life, your work life, and so forth there, how to maximize your time for preparation. Then we'll talk about individual lab strategy. We'll talk about the lab strategy as a whole. How would you do like an RNS lab from beginning to end? And then we'll talk about individual task strategy, meaning how do you deal with individual tasks in a particular lab. Okay, first off, I'm going to talk about a lot of the problems that we see that people run into when they're preparing for the CCIE Lab. Okay, there really isn't a true structured approach out there for the CCIE Lab that's put out by Cisco. Cisco just says, take these classes, get this experience, give us $1,250. Okay, an average person takes the RNS CCIE Lab, the last published data on that, I believe it was like 2.7 times, so about 3 times. For the security, it's probably about the same. For the SP, it's probably a little bit lower. The SP exam, I would say the average that I think people take the lab, I'd say 2. That's not a published stat by Cisco. That's just from my experience, people working with the lab. And for voice, it's pretty high. I think it's around 3 or 4 for the voice CCIE. It's just because they have such a broad range of topics to cover in the voice CCIE. One of the problems that people run into, because Cisco really doesn't provide a solution for people to prepare for the lab, what happens is people end up taking the wrong approach. And this approach that people do, they end up brute forcing the CCIE Lab. So what they'll do is they will take the lab over and over and over and over again until they eventually pass.